Joining us now on the line from the nation's capital, John Ivison, political columnist for the National Post, and Joanne Chianello, city affairs columnist at the Ottawa Citizen. And with us back here in studio, Adam Radwanski, Queen's Park columnist for the Globe and Mail, and Robert Benzie, Queen's Park bureau chief at the Toronto Star. Happy to have you two here. Happy to have you two in the nation's capital. We are going to talk about what this election either has or has not been about over the next 40 minutes or so. And to do that, we want to actually, we're going to play some tape here off the top, because we have, as you know, crossed the province to 5 different locations over the past several months, trying to get a sense of what the citizens want talked about in this campaign. So, Michael, without further ado, let's roll the tape and let everybody know what the citizens' agenda was all about. Because over the last 8 months, we went to 5 different Ontario cities and invited interested and engaged citizens to meet together for a day-long event that we called Agenda Camp. The citizens' assignment during Agenda Camp was to determine what the key provincial election issues ought to be.
What is it that we want the provincial government, and what is it we want the parties to do to help Hamilton?
Plus, even in Mississauga, I mean, how many people don't have a doctor?
Question of the North. There has been no investment for 100 years like there was in the period 1900 to 1910.
What are we going to do with the healthcare system in Niagara? What are you going to do with Brock and Niagara College? What are you going to do with the agricultural community to use that as an economic catalyst?
At the end of each Agenda Camp, our citizen participants voted to determine which of the issues discussed merited the most attention. And the next day in a live broadcast, we put those top issues to representatives of the 4 major political parties.
The challenge is to create a clean, stable, and modern electricity system in the province of Ontario, a system that would meet the needs of the 21st century economy and the quality of life we enjoy in this province.
I got my hydro bill yesterday. It's the biggest one I've ever had. My air conditioner isn't running right now. Most people are feeling the pinch of bloated electricity bills, and it's part of a bigger problem in Ontario that just zeroes down on the fact that people are hurting.
Instead of the media talking to...
Let them know.
We went to Ottawa, Hamilton, Niagara, Sudbury, and Mississauga, all in an effort to come up with what we call the citizens' agenda. And there it was. And after it was all said and done, Michael, if you would, let's bring up the top 4 issues that citizens in these 5 locations voted on and decided ought to be the most important issues in this campaign. The citizens' agenda top 4 issues were social services and governance tied for number 1, energy, and health care. Okay, that's what we're going to talk about then over the next 40 minutes or so. And social services, and it's funny, jobs and the economies, deficits, debts, didn't make the cut. Social services did. And here's Julie Lalonde during our Agenda on the Road program in Ottawa. Roll tape.
Children's aid societies are not, there's no oversight by the Ombudsman, there's no oversight by the government. 85% of people in childcare are in an unregulated, unlicensed childcare facility. We have serious housing issues. Violence against women continues to be an issue. And by treating social services as this soft issue that we'll get to after the economy is ignoring the fact that people can't go to work if they don't have a place to live, if they live in a home where there's violence, if they don't have access to childcare. And so this is a serious issue that we want to see as a forefront and not so much this afterthought.
She wants to see it at the forefront and not as an afterthought. Adam, did she get her wish? Was this campaign enough about social services?
I would be hard-pressed to say that she got her wish that it was front and center. Frankly, I don't think any of the parties spent a lot of time talking about these issues. I mean, unless we're going to count healthcare, which we're not, because we're going to talk about that separately. But in terms of social services, look, I mean, the NDP did have some stuff in their platform. For instance, at one point during the campaign, they did an announcement on providing assistance for people, low-income people, for housing. But I mean, to show you what kind of priority that was even for them, it wasn't even Andrea Horwath who made the announcement on it. It was a couple of their candidates. And I can't recall a lot of days that she spent talking about it. And that was probably more than the other parties did. So, frankly, no, I think the assessment, although you evidently heard differently and your viewers reflected differently, the sense seemed to be jobs, economy, that kind of stuff was where they were going to focus heavily, taxes, maybe healthcare, but not the kind of what we're unfortunately referred to there as the softer, or seen as the softer issues, just did not get a lot of play.
Okay, Joanne, let me go to you on that one. Based on what you saw out there on the hustings, did social services get the kind of play from the parties that clearly our citizens' agenda, a citizens' assembly rather, wanted to get?
No, not at all. I don't remember a single time, actually, that that social services came up. Certainly not children's aid, certainly not housing, possibly in a minor way, as Adam said, but I don't seem to think I can't recall a single time that issue came up. In fact, social services really only made the news when mayors were complaining that the social services uploading would be canceled by the PCs, right, if they came into power. And so that actually, which is an accounting issue, and I don't think that is what your viewers were talking about. That's not what the citizens were talking about, whether we'd be paying for them through property taxes or through our provincial income taxes. And so no, it was very missing, I think, in this campaign.
Rob, did one party put more of an accent on it than any of the other three?
Not as much as you would have thought. I mean, traditionally, the New Democrats are the party that you think of when you think of improving the social safety net. The Liberals, certainly in 2003 and 2007, emphasized those types of issues much more than they did this time. It was like the technocrats were in charge of the platforms this time. There was not a sense that there was a human face on those types of issues in this. Joanne's correct and Adam's correct. It just was not emphasized at all.
And John, I don't want to let the media off the hook on this either, because, often they talk about what they expect us to cover. Did they not put much forward on social services because, frankly, media are tired of covering it?
Well, there may be an element of that, but I mean, it's got to rest with the parties who didn't want to talk about it, and there's a good reason they didn't want to talk about it, because none of them in their platforms are going to spend any money on it in the near future. I mean, if you look at the Liberal platform, it's limited to somewhere around 3%. We're going to talk about health as well, but health, education, social services, they're all limited to 3% growth as far as the eye can see going forward. So they don't want to talk about it because there is going to be no new spending on these areas. They talked about the areas of their platform they had some money to spend. There wasn't much of that. I suspect there'll be even less of it when the books actually come in. So yeah, it was an economic imperative, I think.
Okay, Adam, the parties didn't want to talk about it very much. That seems pretty clear. Is it our responsibility then to kind of beat it like a drum if they don't want to hear about it, because clearly the public is interested in it?
I suppose it might have been, but I think there's an interesting issue here that John touched on there for a moment, which is that because the focus is on spending in other areas and because there's generally fairly modest expectations for what can be spent, one of the interesting conversations, and maybe we should have tried to start this during the campaign, even as media, and certainly something that will come up in the next few years, is how much should government narrow its focus? I mean, look, healthcare spending is supposed to be flattened in terms of the increases, but it's still taking up a huge piece of the pie. Yep. Education, the same thing. No party seems to want to touch spending on those two areas or even flatten it that much. So the question is, does that mean that government has to, as Tim Hudak kept saying during the campaign, stick to its knitting, was his preferred term? Does it have to rein in what it does, rely more on the private sector to deliver things, form more public-private partnerships? It's something that is maybe a little bit hinted at during the campaign, something we didn't really talk about that much.
So Rob, Julie Lalonde was the woman at the beginning of this in the tape piece who said issues like children's aid, childcare, housing issues, violence against women, if you're somebody who cares about those issues, what would your expectations be, regardless of what party's in power, going forward over the next 4 years, given how little this was talked about in the campaign?
I mean, what the Liberals would do is they would argue, for example, that full-day kindergarten is a social service in the sense that it's a complement to daycare, to childcare. But you're right. I mean, because these things were not emphasized in the campaign, and John made a very good point. The reason that they weren't emphasized is that there will be no new spending on these things. We are going into possibly a double-dip recession. The next Premier of Ontario is going to have to make some very, very difficult choices. When you see someone like Dalton McGinty boasting about how he's going to cut the size of the public service by 7%, and that's something that people are supposed to cast ballots in favor from a guy who bolstered public services for 8 years, that tells you the direction that the province is going, regardless of what happens tonight.
He did mention that in the debate, didn't he, Joanne? The fact that, what have you done to rein in spending? He said, I'm laying off civil servants. I mean, that's kind of an unusual pitch to make when you're representing an Ottawa riding, isn't it?
Well, except they're not our civil servants, right? I mean, they're Toronto, so you can't say that federally. But it is true, and I do think you get to a point where when no one is getting any increase, everyone is looking for, no increases in new contracts, and possibly everyone tightening their belts. I mean, it's interesting that the economy didn't make this list, and if I'm correct, if I remember when you guys were in Ottawa talking to people, it was before the dire forecasts, right? And so I wonder now if we went around again, what people would be saying.
Well, that's a good point.
This time around.
Timing is everything, and that's not a bad point to make. Okay, let's pick up on another thing that was also tied for first on this list, and that was governance. This issue came up over and over and over again. People wanted their politicians to be accessible, transparent, accountable. They wanted their democratic system to be more accountable, and from what they were seeing, they weren't getting it. Let's play some tape on that, and then we'll come back and talk. Roll tape, please, Michael.
Let them know how much passion and frustration and anger is out here.
6 months from now, anyone in this room may be a newly elected official, and I guess they too will be demonized. We won't trust them.
We don't trust the politicians, and they're not listening to us, and it's time that they did.
The main question came up over and over again. Who controls our government? It's not the people.
Okay, John Iveson, given the kind of frustration and anger that was out there on this issue, do you think that what has transpired over the last 30 days has gone any measure towards alleviating that?
I didn't hear it mentioned once. I mean, I think the kind of meetings that you're having there, you're obviously getting politically motivated people, many of whom are upset with the status quo, coming out and expressing their anger. You know, all the polls suggested that there was a mood for change, which suggests there is an anger with the status quo. And yet I suspect when the results come in tomorrow, people will have decided that they don't want change after all, that they think that the province is on the right track, and that Dalton McGinty will be re-elected, in which case the existing methods of governance have obviously not upset so many people that they've kicked the bums out.
Well, I'm glad John Iveson knows how the election's going to turn out, because now we can have the night off. Thanks, John. We don't have to bother covering it now. I think the outcome is still a little bit in doubt, and perhaps we should hang around for the next few hours and just check the numbers and make sure. But okay, Joanne, to you too. I mean, how much of this did you hear out there on the hustings?
Well, not much, and certainly not governance per se, but I thought things like e-health scandal would have a bigger resonance. And goodness knows that Tim Hudak's team tried to get that out there, that there was this waste of money, that government has been too big, that it needs to be, you know, reined in. And I thought of all of the Tory platforms, the one everyone could agree on was the plank to review all of the commissions, boards, and agendas, because there do seem to be a huge number of them, and certainly there was a lot of money misspent or spent poorly at e-health, and still that didn't seem to resonate. That didn't seem to stick to Dalton McGinty. Maybe it's too old an issue. Maybe McGinty has possibly addressed it enough that people aren't mad about it anymore. But I was surprised at that part, that kind of issue didn't stick more. I don't know what my Queen's Park colleagues at Queen's Park think about that, but I was surprised that that kind of issue didn't make more of, didn't stick to McGinty a little bit more.
Okay, let's find out. Adam, you know, 4 years ago, the McGinty government had a minister for democratic renewal. I mean, the issues around democracy and transparency and accountability were important enough to have their own minister. That minister doesn't exist anymore. Did you hear any talk on the hustings about this issue?
Not a lot. I mean, on the transparency side, it's true what Joanne said, that Mr. Hudak did spend a lot of the campaign talking in broad terms about secret deals and backroom deals and scandals and all this stuff. I don't know if it was ever properly related to people's lives in a way they care, but I mean, I think you get the sense when you see an opposition politician, which is how Mr. Hudak has a tendency to come off still, despite running for premier, when you see that politician talking about McGinty and his party as though they're sort of a bunch of backroom manipulators, I don't know that people don't just say, well, all politicians are like that. And I think it may lower their esteem in everybody's, all of their esteem in people's eyes, which may have something to do with what I think will be fairly low turnout today, too. You know, I think if they'd found a way to talk about how that directly relates to people's lives, in some way it's the same problem, I think, that in the federal election that the federal Liberals and I guess to a lesser extent than the Democrats, but especially Liberals had in trying to tie stuff to Stephen Harper. You talk about their lack of respect for process and those kinds of things. Most people don't really care about process. They care about how government is delivering services to them, and I don't think the two were ever tied all that well together.
Well, having said that, and again, let's admit it, the people who came to our agenda camps were unusually engaged citizens. I mean, they are people who are prepared to take a Sunday, you know, 8 hours on a Sunday to come out and discuss issues. So we know they are engaged. They care about things like fair vote and first past the post versus proportional representation and that kind of thing. That was a big discussion in 2007, whether we ought to change our electoral system. Any talk of that out there this time?
Well, but remember, Steve, we had a referendum as part of a plebiscite as part of the 2007 election. The first past the post system survived. It was a resounding victory for the status quo over a mixed member proportional representation system. It was a sort of a hybrid. people didn't want that. It only won, I think, in 2 ridings of the 107 ridings in Ontario.
Was
it 4 or
5?
2? Yeah, 5.
I think most of them were south of Bloor Street.
Yeah,
so.
I live in one of them, Trinity Spadina. I mean, and I think all of them were won by New Democratic MPPs as by coincidence. I mean, it just wasn't an issue anymore. And we talked to Mr. McGinty after the British election, the inconclusive hung parliament in the UK, and asked, look, if it looks like MMP or first past post there could be a change there because of what the Liberal Democrats were talking about at that time. It didn't transpire that way. We asked Mr. McGinty, and he said, no, the issue's closed. He said it's closed in Ontario, and I got lots of angry emails from the folks at Fair Vote Canada complaining about us, saying that people don't want to talk about this anymore. But you know what? Unfortunately, they don't.
Well, some of them don't, but some of them do. And John, I think the fact is, if one of the ways that I guess people looked at potentially getting more women involved in politics, and certainly getting more Greens, or some Greens, into the Ontario legislature was by going to a different voting system. Now, I know they were sending me emails about it, and they were, calling me about this. Were the parties discussing this at all, or was there anything going on out there on the hustings about this?
I'm sure the Greens were. we didn't tend to cover them. So, although I have to admit, I was very surprised at how good Mike Schreiner was at the international ploughing match. I mean, he had the advantage of growing up in a farm, but he was.
He drove a car.
He drove a car?
He drove a car at the ploughing match.
Oh, did he? But anyway,
the guy's from Kansas. He's got to know how to plow a straight furrow. But anyway.
Sure. And but so, to your point, though, I mean, but the Greens have made a breakthrough on the hill behind us here, and they did it by piling all the resources into one riding under a first past the post system. So, I think you got to just play within the structure that's there, and it did not seem to me that there was a clamour for democratic reform on the hustings.
Okay, no clamour for democratic reform, fair enough, but people still want their government to be accountable to them, Adam. They want the government to be transparent. They would like to be able to have, I remember in Hamilton, we had people, person after person after person at agenda camp standing up and saying, I need to be able to have input into the way my government works for me. They don't feel they have it. Will they feel any better after the last 30 days?
Unfortunately, I would doubt that. I mean, this has not been a campaign in which the leaders, with the possible exception of the NDP to an extent, but in which the leaders have really connected well with candidates. I mean, you've also had the usual reports of a bunch of ridings where Conservative candidates haven't even gone to the debates locally. Mr. McGinty has run what is really, as he did last time, very much a bubble campaign where there's not a lot of interaction with real people.
Let's pursue that for a second. Mm-hmm. Did the Premier ever do a single event where he had the potential to run into somebody whose job didn't depend on a policy of his? In other words, I know he toured a lot of solar plant manufacturers and that kind of thing, but they love his Green Energy Act, so their jobs depend on him. Did he ever do any main streeting or any kind of anything where he'd run into a normal person?
To my knowledge, no. I won't claim to have been on his bus the full time, but I don't think he ever did. I think it was all, and Mr. Hudak did a little bit, but not a lot. Yeah. I think the closest he would have come would have been interacting with shopkeepers and so on, who I suppose don't directly relate to that, but at the same time, they're also vetted very heavily to make sure they're not going to say anything that would be awkward. So.
Rob, what about it?
Oh, Steve.
Okay, John,
Steve,
you go first, and then Rob.
The ploughing match, it was a rural audience who were not well disposed towards him when he went up, and he actually was very good there. He was very convincing. Two of the people who were introducing him broke into tears because of thanking all the people who had helped, and he said, you country boys, I can tell you've got broad backs, but you've also got warm hearts. People really reassessed him. You could look in the crowd, and people who were going to boo him off, I think, were applauded him at the end. So he definitely ran a bubble campaign, no doubt. I mean, the whole week I was with him, he didn't interact, but that was one occasion where he did mingle a little bit.
Robbie
but he didn't really go out on the streets,
No.
I'm interrupting now, John, a
Go
little
ahead,
bit,
Joanne.
but he did. But even at that event, he didn't really go out into the crowds as much. Yes, he was good at that. I agree. Nothing like Andrea Horwath, though. I mean, who literally had no idea. Homeless people came up to speak with her. I followed her around a little bit in Eastern Ontario, where she had no idea who was going to come and talk to her, which was very different from the other two.
Oh, I think Andrea Horwath, you and I saw her on the subway one day. I mean, she'd go anywhere.
Adam and I were with Tim Hudak in Oakville one day, and he did a little main streeting, and he was confronted by a protester. And I actually thought he handled it pretty well. She was worried about the mega quarry in Shelburne. And he said, look, I'm against it too, and our local MPP there is against it. I mean, he handled it very well. To what John and Joanne are talking about, did Mr. McGinty campaign in a bubble? Yeah, he did, but the Prime Minister did the same thing in the spring, and it works. And as the leader of a government, you kind of, it's a little bit more difficult for him to walk down Yonge Street and dive into crowds. And
they always used to do it, Rob.
Yeah, I know they used to.
Everybody used to do
now,
it.
I mean, I remember one day seeing Mr. McGinty getting in a car at the Sutton Place Hotel and taking the car from the Sutton Place Hotel, which is at the corner of Bay and Wellesley, to his office, which is at the corner of Wellesley and Avenue Road, which Usain Bolt could run it in 9 seconds. It's that close. I mean, and I remember thinking that's odd. Like, I remember Bob Ray when he was premier taking the subway and stuff like that. So I think they claim that it's for security reasons. I don't know. I think it's not a good precedent.
I think it is the nature of the modern campaign. I mean, it's basically moving from photo op to photo op, and they basically change the backdrop and do the same event over and over again. And to some extent, it's maybe an advantage for a politician not to have a desperate desire to be liked. And we've seen that backfire on people. It worked well for Ms. Horvath, but she needed to introduce herself more. For Mr. McGinty, there would have been very little upside, I think, in doing it. And as we've seen, frankly, the campaign went pretty well from his perspective, at least in terms of getting back in the game. The danger is, as a premier, let's say he does win a third term, and we'll see. You know, every leader in office becomes a little more remote. You're surrounded. The bubble thing isn't just during campaigns, it's all the time. Yeah. And to just maintain any kind of perspective to the outside world and just to know how people are feeling and how things resonate, you're having to rely on people very close to you to convey that. And that was one of the things I thought he was vulnerable on coming into this campaign. I don't know that the Tories did that good a job of exploiting it, but it's something to watch if he does wind up serving more time in government.
But let me come full circle on this to you, John Ivison, and that is that, again, the original complaint was, we don't have access, we don't have input. You know, once every 4 years, these folks are supposed to get out there and walk up and down the streets like normal people and campaign so that Mr. and Mrs. Everyday Ontario can walk up to them and say, can I talk to you about something for 10 seconds? And they don't do that anymore because I know it's too risky and they don't want to risk having that YouTube moment. But what does that say about where our campaigns are at nowadays and what kind of expectations people can have about the people they elect?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think not only the leaders, the candidates. I don't think I got a single visit from a candidate throughout the whole election campaign. But yeah, I think maybe McGinty can get away with it. He seems to be, well, we called him Teflon on the paper, but he also, I don't think anybody thinks he's personally corrupt. I mean, so the idea that of transparency, it doesn't come down on him like it perhaps has on other governments before. But yeah, I agree that there should be more mainstreaming, there should be more mingling, there should be more of a ground game, I guess. And but as we all know, the air war is where most of it is won. In fact, it seems to be won in paid media rather than even in earned media.
Yep. Okay, let's move on to Chapter 3 of our discussion here. Another big topic that we faced in our 5-city tour of the province of Ontario was, no surprise here, energy. And here is an excerpt now, an exchange on the topic. This was at Agenda Camp Niagara. Melissa Helwig and Kim Crater. Melissa is in the audience. Kim, of course, seeking re-election for the Liberals in Niagara Falls. Here's how it went. Roll tape.
How will you candidates address the impending shortage of energy supply in Ontario?
I'm going to answer the question, but I was there when the NDP were in power. And unfortunately, I remember this because we had deputations at City Council. You know what the big issue was? Hydro. The rates are too high. So there's a change in government. The Conservatives come in. Guess what the big issue was? Hydro. I was there again. And, the rates are too high. They went to a different system trying to figure out how to do it. Now we come to power.
Rob, is he right? This is always a big issue. Nothing new here?
Yeah, it is a big issue, and it's one of those things in Ontario. You can argue that since the days of Sir Adam Beck, we have had subsidized electricity that's been artificially cheap. Everyone complains about their hydro bill and it going up. No one likes opening their bill, but yet your cable bill goes up, your phone bill goes up, your internet bill goes up. All these things, other things have been going up, and yet government has no direct control over that, so that they can blame the government for that. That's a big reason why Mr. McGinty spent $1 billion. We're running a huge deficit, but we're spending $1 billion from the Treasury to subsidize electricity use in this province, and that seems to have helped him in this campaign. It's diffused a lot of the problems that the Tories and the New Democrats thought they could exploit about people feeling vulnerable because of their hydro bills.
Well, Joanne, I know there was no issue in this campaign as there was in 2007, the faith-based school funding issue, the one issue that kind of sucked all the oxygen out of the campaign. But to the extent that there was something, the Green Energy Act, what Mr. McGinty is doing in terms of, he likes to say, pick a lane. He's picking a lane on green energy. Did this ever, threaten to get out of control on the campaign trail for him?
Yeah, earlier on, I think it did, and then somehow it seemed to have lost its momentum, and I'm not sure why. Possibly the Samsung deal is pretty complicated, so I'm not sure everyone gets it. There's two issues of it. You hear Samsung deal, and the Tories are trying to say, oh, the Samsung deal is going to make your bills go up. But then you have the Liberals saying, well, the Samsung deal is going to bring us lots of jobs, right? And I don't think people understand this fairly complex deal. Also, I think as time goes on, I think people realize that the most the Tories can do right now is take the HST off your hydro bill, the NDP as well. So your bill's not really going to go down that much. So I think they've realized your hydro bill is going to stay about the same. You're not going to get a huge amount of relief. However, it will get more expensive going forward with the Liberals' green energy plan. And for some reason, that is, you had a lot of people angry about this, especially in Eastern Ontario. And now that has abated somewhat. And I'm not sure why that is. Again, I think it has something to do with the complexity of that Samsung deal. But also, there's also an element, I think, of society that hears renewable energy and thinks that's a very laudable thing. And of course, we should be doing that, and don't really realize what a risky plan it might be actually for the Ontario economy.
Well, having said that, John, the Premier didn't walk away from that policy at all during the campaign. He doubled down on it, if anything. I mean, he probably visited a dozen solar plants or wind farms or renewable energy places during the course of the campaign. No fear there on his part, right?
No, it felt like I was with him on every step of the way. I visited at least 5. And fortunately, we went back to one the next morning and found out that they were on temporary layoff. So, yeah, I mean, it's the golden retriever puppies of power generation, wind and solar. I mean, who could be against it? But once you delve into the policy, I think there are very good reasons to be sceptical that 50,000 jobs are going to be created. Even more sceptical that they're not going to be hugely expensive and potentially kill other jobs because of the increased rate of hydro, which even the government admits is going to go up by 46% over 5 years. But none of that seemed to percolate with the electorate. I mean, I think that it was really the one issue that they were, one major issue where it wasn't a Me Too campaign on behalf of the Conservatives. On health and education, they matched the Liberals step for step. On power, they said something completely different. We're going to get rid of this feed-in tariff program, even if it means, clearly there would be some job losses, although Mr. McGinty made a huge play of the fact that every plant we visited would be closed down if the FIT program was closed. Even though after we spoke to some of the managers, they said, well, no, we assumed that the tariff we're being paid, or the subsidy we're being paid is going to gradually reduce over time, and we have no plans to close down, even if it's eliminated. So there was a lot of smoke and mirrors there. I think it was really just too complicated for voters to grasp, and so they moved on.
Adam, how do you see it?
I think you touched on this, the Liberals doubling down on it. I think that caught the Conservatives a little bit off guard. I mean, it caught me off guard. I assume it caught them off guard, too. I mean, it seemed as though something could damage them, that they were trying to do damage control on, maybe in the final year of government a little bit. And then suddenly Mr. McGinty is every second day or every day doing one of these events. I don't want to say that it totally worked. We'll find out. I mean, it's still quite possible that the Liberals will have lost some ridings, particularly in southwestern and to a lesser extent Eastern Ontario, based partly on this issue. We'll find out very soon. But I do think that what may have worked in his favor on this particular issue is that whatever the merits or the drawbacks of what the Liberals are trying to do, he's very passionate about it. And it does seem genuine when in some cases a little evangelical and a little, I find in some cases alarming how much faith he's put in this. But he certainly believes, and I think voters do sense that a little bit. I mean, it's one thing to push policies that you think are going to get you votes. This one, in addition to that, they clearly actually think is a good idea. And I think if you're able to convey that with some sincerity, it actually does help. And I think that may have worked for him this time.
Just want to let everybody know the poll. Yeah, just before you come in, John, I should let everybody know as I look at my watch that the polls close in half an hour. So we're going to have returns coming in about a half an hour's time. Anyway, make your point, John.
Just briefly, it was also a strategic decision by the Liberals, who were worried about Andrea Horwath. So they go heavy on green at the same time as she's pushing a policy to cut the HST on gas, and a lot of the green vote moves to the Liberals.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you about, Rob, because the Greens did really well in the last Ontario election. 8-point-something% of the vote, I think. I haven't seen them reach that in any of the polling so far. Did the Liberals steal the Green vote with this kind of a plan?
I think a couple of things happened to. First of all, Green leader Mike Schreiner did, I think, a great job, as good a job as he could, getting attention. He's running in a very safe Conservative seat. It's going to be very difficult for him to unseat Jim Wilson. So I don't know if they're going to have a seat in the legislature. I'd be very surprised after. In half an hour time, we might know. But I think that did the Green vote get squeezed to the Liberals? I think some of it did for a couple of reasons. First of all, the economy is not great, and the environment is one of those issues, rightly or wrongly, that people kind of, it falls by the wayside right away. I mean, people are more concerned about jobs and the economy, jobs and job creation, than they are about, you know, getting bullfrog power or something like that and paying more for their hydro bills, so they can be ethical and moralistic about their sources. So I think because of that, the Greens did not seem as relevant provincially. I mean, you guys did a great job always having a Green candidate come on, but Schreiner wasn't invited to the debate. You moderated. We wrote some stories about the Greens, but we did not follow Schreiner every day the way we did the other leaders, and it was just because we couldn't justify it to our editors couldn't justify it. I mean,
but if you had to make the political calculation, you'd say by McGinty's going Green, he kind of won the issue, did he not? Yeah, I mean, he, as Adam said, he doubled down on green energy, and he made himself look like he was the green guy. Although one thing I would correct you on, he did not go to any wind farms this whole campaign. He went to places where they manufactured wind turbines, and that's a different issue, and I think that will hurt them in rural Ontario. There's a lot of people who do not like these things, a lot of NIMBYism, and I can't blame them. I was amazed how many, we were all over Ontario, and I couldn't believe these turbines were everywhere. It's crazy. No, that's an important distinction. I'm glad you made it. Okay, let's go into our last section now, and that is healthcare. Healthcare, of course, routinely comes out very high in public opinion surveys as to the issues that people care about, and not surprisingly, our citizens' agenda. Engaged citizens who were on the road in five different locations, rather, over the past year, also found it to be an important issue. Here's one participant sharing a personal story on the road at the agenda camp in Hamilton. Roll tape, please.
Well, I like that you guys all recognize there is a problem with the healthcare system, and all of you are talking about the right things, but I'm not hearing the details that I want to hear. My grandma recently was diagnosed with a brain tumor and lung cancer, and she needed healthcare, but what she got was a lot of bureaucracy, and in the time it took to get her the help she needed, she rapidly degenerated, and then instead of getting radiation, she's now looking at palliative care. So this affects people a lot, and I want to know, what are you going to do so that we can actually see how the money is being spent, and so that instead of giving money to people in suits and ties, you give it to people in white coats and stethoscopes.
Joanne, I wonder if you think that kind of plays into the tack that Tim Hudak played in this campaign, which is we're spending $300 million a year on local health integration networks. That money ought to go into frontline care. Do those stories help him?
Yeah, they do, and also those numbers help him. They always throw around that $300 million, but that's over the last 4 years. It's actually about $75 million a year to run all the local health integration networks. And, you know, I've talked to people here in Ottawa. It is not a hated thing. It actually is run fairly well. I know some of the other ones have had a few little scandals about, you know, how things are going, but I think it is a bit disingenuous for the Tories to say they can just take all of that money and put it directly on the front lines. I'm sure that there's a way to pare back some of the bureaucracy, but it's a large public system. Someone has to run it, and if they're not going to run it locally, then they're going to run it out of Toronto. We had Wilbert Keon, a renowned heart specialist, and a retired Conservative senator say that cancelling the LHINs is the stupidest idea he's ever heard. So yes, it helps that there is an idea that it would be great to put that money directly into hiring more doctors and nurses, but I'm skeptical that that's the way it can actually work.
Adam, that might have been the one area in health policy that the Premier and Tim Hudak really disagreed on. Did they disagree substantially or substantively on anything else?
Not significantly. They tried to invent differences to fit, and that is one where they did disagree a little bit, although frankly I think that was an attempt by the Conservatives to find a little bit of ground they could disagree on without being different than anything else. There was a little bit. I mean, the Tories put a little more emphasis in their platform on long-term care, the Liberals a little more on home care. So that's one difference. Otherwise, I think the main way that the Liberals tried to find a difference, and I don't think this got that much traction, they tried it in the last few days of the campaign, was to talk about who would stand up to the federal government, to Stephen Harper, as the new National Health Court is negotiated. That would have had probably more traction if not for the fact that during the federal campaign a few months ago, the Conservatives basically said they'd keep raising it by the same level. So it didn't have the juice that the Liberals thought,
2 years.
which is more ambitious than what the provinces want to do. So that kind of lost a bit of its traction. I think that was really, look, all of these folks know that they're going to have incredibly important decisions to make on healthcare and probably some controversial reforms to make. I don't mean private, public, and all that, but just structural reforms, how doctors go about their practices, all that stuff in the next few years. They really didn't want to talk about that during the campaign. It's not something that the Tories saw any advantage in. And what are the Liberals going to do? Say we're going to make these tough decisions better than they will? That's not much of a line during a campaign, unfortunately.
Well,
maybe
John,
it should be, but it's not.
I remember, John, during the leaders' debate, there was one question on video, I think it was the last question of the night, where the gentleman said, what would you allow the private sector to have a greater role in healthcare? And they all ran screaming away from that question. Was there much discussion about healthcare reform in this campaign?
No, I think the one interesting point was when Dalton McGinty urged the doctors who are coming up for contract renewal or renegotiation to take a pay freeze, which the next day we were on with Hudak and we asked him, would you, as a last resort, impose a pay freeze? And this could be, and he eventually said yes. And I think when talking to the Conservatives, this is where they see a lot of their $2.3 billion in unidentified savings coming from. That they would, impose a freeze on the teachers who are coming up, the OPSUs coming up for renewal next year. So it kind of led into that debate. And frankly, when we look at health spending's been increasing 6-7% a year. We managed somehow to get it to 3% last year, and looking forward, it's got to go to 3% every year if they ever want to get out of deficit. So these are hard negotiations. I think that when Don Drummond's report comes down into the future of the Ontario Public Service, whoever is Premier is going to have to really bite the bullet and look at the costs. I mean, costs 55% are wages, $50 billion a year. That is where the health debate is going to be.
I'd be interested in your opinion on this, Rob. The Premier in I guess in the last week or so, week and a half of the campaign was saying, we are going to have a new negotiation in a couple of years with Ottawa on this. Now, who do you want sitting at that table for the province of Ontario? Me or, basically Stephen Harper's second cousin, another Conservative? Who's going to do a better job standing up for Ontario? How persuasive was that argument, do you suppose?
I think it maybe rallies the Liberal base, but remember, Stephen Harper and Dalton McGinty gave us the harmonized sales tax. They worked very closely on that. They gave us the auto bailout deal. The reason that we still have Chrysler and General Motors in Canada is because Stephen Harper and Dalton McGinty could make a deal together and could work together.
Billions.
To spend billions. Corporate welfare, the Tories used to call that kind of stuff. So I think I thought it was an interesting and not particularly surprising tactic for the Liberals to slap up Stephen Harper. Of course, Stephen Harper won 73 seats in Ontario on May 2nd, so you could argue that he's still a popular fellow here. So maybe it would have hurt the Liberals to have those ads. I don't think there's any evidence that it did, but it's just it was a kind of a curiosity of the campaign.
I think Dalton McGinty be happy with 73 seats tonight.
The best he ever did was 72. So boy, he'd be doing cartwheels if he wins that, man.
Adam, did you want to follow up on that?
I was going to say, it really, on the federal provincial stuff, it really is all game with this stuff. I can't say that strongly enough. You've got, at one point you've got Jim Flaherty popping up and endorsing Tim Hudak, and this is the guy who negotiated the HST and pushed it on the province, and is now endorsing a guy who's not running against it, but has complained bitterly about it. At the same time, you've got the Liberals. Dwight Duncan will occasionally go off on these guys. Ask anybody who knows Dwight Duncan what he actually thinks of Jim Flaherty. They love each other. They're buddies. So it's just not. These aren't
Adam,
real.
They love each other. That's a bit strong, don't you?
They have a fondness for each other. It's not getting any better either. But I'm just trying to say that they're.
You've stepped in it now.
They have a lot of mutual respect, and there's. They have to pretend they don't for political purposes. And there's the occasional partisan who really does get cranked up and really doesn't like the other guys, but mostly it's a show, and they know that they'll work together after the election, whichever party wins.
Joanne?
Yeah, there's two quick things on this. One, it's interesting that Dalton McGinty says this about Hudak working with the Conservatives, because in the last time that they negotiated the health accord, it was McGinty working with Liberal Prime Minister Paul Martin, and he seemed to work very well, is what Dalton McGinty tells us now.
Good point.
So that's kind of interesting. The other thing is, I think it was just part of a bigger strategy by McGinty to say, look, do you want this Hudak guy to be Premier? Do you think he can be a Premier? And he put his leadership abilities into question. And part of that is, do you trust him to negotiate the health accord, whether that was fair or not? But in the last, I'd say, week and a half of the campaign, certainly since the debate, the question has been, who do you want to be Premier?
Minute and a half to go. John, you want another word on this?
I was going to say what she said.
Well done. All right. Radwanski, you're going to get the last word then tonight.
Fantastic.
How well were citizens served by what transpired over the last 30 days?
I don't think it was a terrible campaign that we sometimes say it was. I mean, every campaign, it seems, we complain that they didn't discuss the real issues. And there were real differences here. We talked about energy policy, which is a real difference. We didn't talk as much about the economy. I will say there were points in the campaign where I thought on the economy in particular, you could actually see interesting divergent views. I mean, you've got a Liberal leader who was advocating, I thought, quite effectively and strongly for an interventionist, activist approach to government, where you try to use government to create jobs and so on. You had a Conservative leader who I thought at times made a quite effective and impassioned case in favor of leaving it to the private sector, of letting the free market decide. They didn't do that all that much, but there were points where you could actually see these folks would govern differently. And I do think over the course of the campaign, if you watch closely, you at least had a chance to get, and I don't want to leave Ms. Horvath out of it, I think she articulated some other ways of building the economy, including sort of Buy Ontario thing and all that. There were differences there. You had to look for them a bit. But I don't think you could watch these folks every day and think they would govern exactly the same, much as we like to pretend they're all the same. And I think that is actually a service to voters. I mean, they didn't do it as well as they could have, but they didn't campaign quite as badly and similarly to each other as we like to claim they did.
Well, after knocking on tens of thousands of doors and running through numerous pairs of running shoes and riding buses and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, we've got just over 15 minutes to wait before we finally find out what the last 30 days have all been about. And we want to thank the four of you for coming in tonight to help us understand a little bit more about what transpired over the last 30 days. My thanks out of town to John Iveson of the National Post, Joanne Chianello from the Ottawa Citizen. Good of you two to be there in the nation's capital for us. Robert Benzie, the Toronto Star, Adam Radwanski of the Globe and Mail. Enjoyed reading all of your stuff over the last 30 days, guys, and we're really grateful to you for coming in tonight.